I brought this up because I imagine people watching and listening to you might start thinking like, okay, well that's really creepy and weird, James, and that Fetzer, we get that this guy Fetzer was enamored of her and into her stuff, and but these people lived a long time ago, and SEL's happening now and so forth. But so I mean, like, how do you think they're connected? And so I started scrolling through this, and I started looking at, first of all, the things that they're saying about education, like here, where they say the new group of world servers is presently expanding in size. Servers are basically who they refer to like their disciples, their people at their little clubs and their groups. Um, and influence, size and influence, there currently is increasing with a multitude of creative ideas to meet today's challenges. And there are many signs that a realignment with the divine plan is currently taking place in the many initiatives that are exploring how a new type of culture can take root around the world. Nowhere is this more important than in the philosophy of education. For the way we educate influences thought, perception, desire, and action in all areas of human enterprise. Of real significance here is UNESCO's worldwide initiative, Futures of Education Learning to Become. This
Learning
new
to
goal,
become is Marxist, by the way. That's
yes, it
Hegelian
is.
or Hermetic magic. That's becoming. Things are supposed to become what they were meant to be. The divine plan is supposed to get back on track so things can become what they're meant to be. Humans are to be made to become who they were meant to be. Trans people are never actually trans. They're becoming trans eternally.
That's right.
So just to point out that magic word becoming, that's a trigger word if you're paying attention to these things.
Exactly. And this is the new goal. This new goal for education has been described as global citizenship. Wait, have we heard that from Castle? Have we heard that in SEL? Like constantly. Global citizenship for human flourishing, which they also talk about in SEL. And the
Mm-hmm.
spirit of this ideal permeates the landmark report that has now been published, Reimagining Our Futures Together, a New Social Contract for Education. The report served as the key reference document for the recent United Nations Summit, Transforming Education, which was here. This is where they talk about that. So I'm sorry to interrupt you. I just wanted to, as we're talking about this, quickly, connect the dots for people that yes, this woman is was saying all these things back in, the 1920s, the 1930s, so forth. And then you mentioned in the podcast how she probably most likely wrote her book, the book you were reading from about education in the new age,
Mm-hmm.
possibly in the late 30s, but it wasn't really published until the 50s. She died in 49, so it had to have
Right.
been written before then. And so it's tempting as it is to say, well, okay, some crackpot people did this trendy new age gobbledygook back then. Here it is today on a website talking about things going on at the UN and UNESCO today. And we know for a fact that Castle and UNESCO and SEL are, forget playing footsie, they're
They're
having
the same
orgies.
thing. They're
They're the
literally
same thing.
basically
They're
the
the same
same
thing.
thing. It's like there's no difference between those two pictures that you just showed me. Yeah, and so here you see the same language again, the transformative power of education. That could be on any Castle document. That could be on any NEA document right now. That could be on any UNESCO document right now about education. It could be on any World Economic Forum document. This is the exact same language again and again. But what really sealed the deal, because I went into, it's like, I don't know how to record this, but I've you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go read some excerpts. And there was this one quote when I was reading The Education in the New Age. And I know your listeners are dying to know what New Age we're talking about. Do you want to tell them?
Age of Aquarius.
It's the age of Aquarius. Of course it
Sorry,
is.
I had
Because
to.
of course it is. And so there's this one passage that just stuck out to me like a sore thumb when I read it. And if I may, I opened the podcast with it. I'll do a little bit longer read. It says, much greater care will have to be given in picking and training the teachers of the future. Their mental attainments and their knowledge of their particular subject will be of importance, but so knowing things, being smart, knowing your subject matter will be important, but more important still will be the need for them to be free from prejudice and to see all men as members of a great family. Sounds like inclusion, doesn't it? The educator of the future, she says, will need to be more of a trained psychologist than he is today. Besides imparting academic knowledge, he will realize that his major task is to evoke out of his class of students a real sense of responsibility. no matter what he has to teach: history, geography, mathematics, languages, science in its various branches, or philosophy. He will relate it all to the science of right human relations, you mean equity and sustainability, and try to give a truer perspective than in the past upon social organization. And it's like, wow, that really kind of is what SEL does. And then there's another section, and I'd have to go into and dig around to figure it out. That when I was reading through and constructing what I wanted to put in the podcast, it's like most of the Castle Five are listed here in kind of description rather than given quite explicitly. But you can see the bridge between the social emotional learning 5 competency areas getting outlined by Castle and this particular
Right.
book by Alice Bailey rather unambiguously. And then you have the bridge character of John Fetzer. Because when I started organizing the podcast, I thought, well, I know it came from the Fetzer Institute. Maybe that's a coincidence.
Right.
Maybe they were offering a facility. Somebody's looking for a conference for education, yada, yada. These things happen. And then I start to read backwards into this book, and it's so weird that it didn't stick out at first. I read this book twice. And when I read it the second time is when I started to develop a heart condition. And then I was like, the Christians would say that I'm being attacked by demons, and I'm not sure I'm entirely going to disbelieve them on this. I think it was just stress, but you never know. And so then I read this part again, though, and this sticks out. The educator of the future has to be a psychologist. They're going to educate in the science of right human relations. That's going to be woven into all of the subjects. Their subject matter competence and intelligence aren't that important. They have to be
Right.
instead equitable and inclusive. That's not the words used, but those are the words that we would use in 2022 to describe the same thing. And then, like I said, the section where you can derive the Castle Five, self-awareness, self-management, responsible decision making, relationship skills, and then social awareness. And you can actually see the arc in the book to go through those 5. And if you don't know that these 5, they're in order. They go clockwise, starting in the orange. So
Right.
self-awareness, self-management, those are kindergarten, first grade, second grade skills. Responsible decision making as you get to the upper elementary years. Relationship skills in junior high. Social awareness as you progress into high school. That is a progression that they are laying out there in the
They
Castle
also
5.
don't mean what that you think they mean.
None of
So if
them do.
no, so when parents see these, typically they say, "Well, of course I want my child to be self-aware. I want them to manage their emotions." I mean, these sound absolutely legit. Like, why wouldn't we want these things? Well, when you understand that self-awareness is this woo-woo, spiritual, goofy soul garbage, right? Am I getting that right?
Yeah,
This is
exactly.
yeah. The self-management is about also sort of denying your desires, denying what you see with your own eyes, denying this sort of objective reality that you live in and tapping into whatever this other feeling, emotion stuff is. Responsible decision making is understanding your duty to the collective. That's what responsible means in this world. Relationship skills, these are the right human relations. And James, I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about what she meant by right human relations. And then the social awareness, of course, again, gets back to your duty, gets back to, your awareness of your place in the collective and what you're supposed to be doing and how you should use your gifts for the good of all. But what did she mean exactly by right human relations?
Well, I mean, that's a little bit ambiguous. It's never defined in this book, and it's also not defined in at least the portion of her 5-volume set. I forgot what it's titled. I'd have to go look at the top of this book that I've read a little bit of. My guess is that it is because she says, actually, the foreword to this book says, our problem is to attain the kind of overall synthesis that Marxism and neo-scholasticism provide for their followers, but to get this by the freely chosen cooperative methods that Dewey advocated, meaning John Dewey, the educator. It talks about having, 3 fundamental needs must be met. This is again from the foreword by a professor, not by Alice Bailey. Says a psychological theory of the human person to be educated. Educated is in scare quotes. A social theory of the kind of society one is trying to create or preserve as a suitable home for the cultural ideas promulgated. And 3, a worldview or cosmology, a theory of man's place in the universe in which man is a spectator and actor. And so I see and would guess that sustainability and inclusion, the two big buzzwords of the decade, are the science of right human relations. We're going to learn to be diverse, equitable, and inclusive. We're going to learn to be environmentally responsible. We're going to learn to uphold sustainability and to achieve the Sustainable Development
Right.
Goals. And the main book is called A Treatise on the Seven Rays, by the way.
Right. But the idea of teaching children a cosmology is literally teaching children a theology,
That's right.
right?
This is a religion because it's a spirit. I would go cautiously just because I want this nail to land in this coffin all the way. And so a cosmology itself can be a non-religious object that tries to explain why we have a universe and how it works. Fine. But when you're talking about one that is explicitly a spiritual cosmology, you are now teaching a religion. This is not ambiguous. This is a non-ambiguous statement. If you were teaching, and in fact, it's not only is it non-ambiguous, it meets the federal government's definition for a religion, which is, if you didn't know, there's a great law review article. If I remember correctly, it's by Ben Clements, but I'd have to check that. Outlining the history of First Amendment Establishment Clause jurisprudence to determine what definition should work. And it boils down to a comprehensive, or sorry, a system of belief. What is it? Belief something in practice. A system of belief in practice. We'll go with that. That gives answers to fundamental questions about the world and man's role in it, such that it gives rise to duties of conscience.